Hi there, and welcome to another episode on the Green Living Chat podcast. I'm your host, David, and today we are tackling a hot topic of circular economy in Africa. For a long time, where humans were just making, using, and disposing their product and everyday consumption, we have seen the negative impact that the linear economy is having on the environment. So in our quest for a regenerative ecosystem is a term circular economy. Circular economy, according to the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, is a practice and a system in which we can reduce our environmental footprint, generate an increased income, at the same time reduce the resource dependency, and most importantly, minimize our waste generation. In this system, we can have a cleaner production, we can have better services that can expand the lifespan of products, collect these products at the end of their life, separate them into reusable resources, and produce more green products that are toxin-free, have long life, and recyclable. All over the world, nations are striving and trying their best to attain a more and better means of circular economy. But how does circular economy look in Africa? I had a spectacular conversation with the CEO of Footprint Africa, Joanna, Bingham, and a research analyst, Deborah, Nartey, on the topic of Africa's circular economy. In our conversation, Deborah told us that Footprint Africa
wanted to bring out these practices in Africa so that we know that the name circular economy or the tag is new, but the practice has always been with Africa. And so we wanted to showcase these practices and help people know that this is what you've always been doing. So you just have to go back to what you've been doing, like we would say, Sankofa. You just have to go back to what you've been doing.
And Joanna had a little bit to add to this fact that
what is critical to us is this is not a sort of tedious classroom-based program sharing concepts of sustainability. It has to be real and it has to make sense to the businesses that we're working with. And in order for it to make sense, they need to see real life examples.
So we had a deep conversation on how circular economy looks in Africa and dived into the goal and mission of Footprint Africa and what they are doing to change Africa's circular economy narrative. We dived into their mission to prove that businesses can be a force for good at scale. I really can't wait to share this conversation with you. But before we dived into this conversation, Footprint Africa is open for collaborations. So if you are listening to this podcast, just dive into the show notes, get into their social media platforms and their email, and get in touch with them. They have an amazing project they're doing all over Africa, and get in touch with them if you think that you have a story to tell or you have a way to collaborate with them to achieve their goal. And as you do that, why don't you share this podcast and conversation with someone who needs to hear this conversation? Also, consider rating us on any podcast platform where you're listening to this podcast. Don't forget to share your comments on our social media platforms and get interactive with us via email at glcpodcast@ecowametsolutions.com. So grab a coffee and let's get into this episode with Footprint Africa. You are listening to the Green Living Chat podcast, a podcast where we discuss emerging environmental issues around the world and to find sustainable solutions. I'm your host, David Ewusi-Mensah. We use this platform to support environmental-related initiatives, researches, and projects. This podcast is brought to you by Ecowamet Solutions in Ghana with a mission to going back to green. So join us on this train with new episodes this and every Sunday. Here we go. Hello, Joanna and Deborah. Thank you so much for joining me on the Green Living Chats. I'm really glad that I could have a conversation with you. So you're welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay, so I'm really glad that today we can talk about Footprint Africa and the projects that you're doing around the continent. The first time that I heard about Footprint Africa, I think it was a webinar that you organized, I think, a few months ago. I got in touch with Deborah that I was very interested in having you on the podcast to talk about some of the amazing things you're doing in your company. And sometimes it makes me wonder that how did this company start? Where did this initiative start? And Joanna, I would like to engage you a little bit. How was your childhood? How was everything growing up? And how did you get interest in sustainability? And to be honest with you, there's just one question that I really want to ask, that why African continent?
Wow, so starting with a deep psychological question. I think when I was a child, I was quite frustrated, and I was very, I think most children will often say, it's not fair. And I was very conscious of things that weren't fair and injustice. And it made me very frustrated and very angry. So that's something I was conscious of from my childhood. Then I wasn't really sure what to do with my career. But I wanted to do something that was both intellectually stimulating and meaningful. And I wasn't sure how to align both of those two. I managed to find the intellectually stimulating part in a career in investment. And so I was working for a company that had a really strong ethos around sustainability. But one of the things that they felt most strongly about was that a lot of the ways that people were defining sustainability was not really fit for purpose. So it was a lot of tick box exercise, a lot of missing the point by trying to create a matrix and measure things, which is obviously important to measure things, but without really understanding the why behind it. And they talked a lot about companies having a social license to operate in the communities that they're in. And it made me really think about the role of business in society and in communities, which was very exciting for me. And that led me to then start to look at supply chains and power imbalances in global supply chains. So that's a little bit the journey for me into sustainability.
Yeah, it is a quite interesting story. I have another question I'm going to ask as a follow-up, but I would just want to engage Deborah for a second. Deborah, how was it for you growing up? What brought the interest in sustainability?
Thank you. That's growing up, I don't think I'm grown yet. I still see myself as a child. But while growing up, I wanted to do something inspiring that could inspire others. So I was always thinking of, what do I need to do that would make people feel inspired, people want to achieve more? And I knew I didn't want to work in the traditional public sector because it wasn't inspiring. Like, I see people take their bags, go sit at work, doing nothing, come back home. And I didn't like that. So I wanted something inspiring. I remember even when I completed, fast forward, when I completed from university, I was reluctant. I did education, but I was reluctant to just apply to a school. And I was looking around to look for what I wanted to do. And even though I wasn't in the space of recycling, sustainability, and all of that, I was conscious about the use of resources and producing waste and all of that. And so I remember when I got employed at Footprint Africa, that very first week, we went for a seminar. It was on waste management with stakeholders in the waste management sector. And we asked to bring any plastics that we had at home that we wanted to dispose. And I came back I picked an Uber with my plastics. And the Uber driver actually got bored with me. He got angry that I was going to dirty his car.
Yeah.
But then that was it for me. I was always looking out for, what can I do with the waste, or how do I avoid the waste? And so I was trying to be creative. So I would pack a lot of these plastics or papers from packaging, and I'll think of how to engage young people to convert that into art pieces and all of that. So that was growing up for me. I think I'm still growing because I still think that way and I still do stuff that way.
I love the story. It's very inspiring. And, every time I meet my guest, I always find this something about them that is so special that can, inspire someone. There's a girl child somewhere who is looking up to finding role models. And to be honest with you, I see you two as role models for women and young ladies who are growing up. What message would you like to use to educate a teenager who is growing up trying to think about, hey, what can I do in the future? Is circular economy space a place that I could be? Is sustainability a very good place where I think that as a woman I can also get into? What would be a message that you can tell, Joanna?
Well, I hope it wouldn't just be women. I hope we can also be inspiring as global humans to people of
Yes.
any gender. What a big question. The thing that I was afraid of when I was younger was closing doors. And so as a result, my education was relatively generic. So I didn't specialize, and I was really afraid to specialize because I thought it would narrow me into some kind of box. But now, as there is access to skills from the internet, anyone can access information. I think the more specialized people are and the more they explore their niches and the more they bring their flavor, the more they'll stand out. And so I would really encourage people to not be afraid to dive into the things they're curious about, and not be afraid to specialize. Like I said, I don't think you have to be confined into a box. And I think the key thing is, so for example, when I was working in Tanzania, I had a colleague and he had, from a very young age, started working in coffee. And he had started literally by packing coffee beans into bags and shifting them onto trucks. And so he'd really got to know how the coffee industry worked from the inside out. And then he'd started working more and more in an office as a general manager, and then rising up the ranks of the company. And he'd learned everything about P&L, about global supply chains, about commodity pricing, about how to run a company, about how to run a factory, all of those things, which are incredibly important skills and can be transferred to any industry, but he'd learned it by specializing from a young age. And I think that's a really important thing that I think that people should, I wish I had understood when I was younger.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's very inspiring. Now let's get back into today's conversation. Footprints Africa. So what is Footprints Africa and why the African continent?
So as I started to tell you with my own background, I became very passionate about power imbalances in global supply chains. The reality is that supply chains reach the furthest corners of the earth. And so the food on our plates, the clothes on our back, all of that comes from somewhere, the raw materials and the energy and effort that's gone into turning them into a product that we can use or consume. And so I became very fascinated about the dynamics within those supply chains. And because of my role in investment, I was very fortunate to meet leaders in a lot of multinational companies and hear their stories and hear what they were trying to do in lower income markets they were working in. And I heard a lot of stories about expanding middle class and providing goods and services to a growing middle class, and sort of a little bit of patting on the back of some of these organizations. And I was very curious what was happening in practice on the ground with their suppliers. And as I started to kind of peel back the lid, I started to notice that for the suppliers, it was really tough. Being a supplier of a large multinational company was incredibly difficult, and they were really in the pockets of those companies who were calling the shots, and they could tell them how they wanted things to be. And there are many benefits there because a lot of global best practice can be incredible in terms of labor practices, for example, and reducing modern slavery. But there's a lot of challenges there as well. And so what I started to think about was how could we address some of those power imbalances, and how could we support local businesses who are suppliers or potential suppliers to larger businesses to have more of a say, basically, and to be able to not be at the whim of others. And so what we began was a sort of supplier development program in Ghana. And the reason for starting in Ghana was because my chairman, when we were talking about what we could do, and he was asking me, okay, well, what's the first step? And I said, I think we just have to go to a market and start and try, because we can make all the plans we like, but the reality is on the ground, it will be different. And we have to listen to those who are on the ground and stand next to them and understand what their needs are. And so he suggested Ghana. He said he's half Ghanaian himself, but he felt that the level of development, because it's a lower middle income country, so there's already an industrialized base. So you're not starting from too early a level, which we probably wouldn't have the capacity to work in. And they have good rule of law. It's English speaking. It's on the same time zone as where I'm from in the UK. And so it felt like a good starting place. And we already had some connections there, which is very helpful, particularly in Ghana, where who you know does matter. So that was why we started in Ghana, and that was kind of the original ethos of what we were there to do.
Wow. Before I ask you a little bit about how the progress has been from the initial initiative, let me engage Deborah for a second. You mentioned earlier when you were talking about how growing up was and you majored in education and all that. But coming into the circular economy space and working with Footprint, as I checked about the past 2 years, what are some of the circular economy challenges that you think you have been able to identify and you guys are sort of trying to solve on the continent?
From what we've been doing or from the work we've been doing, we'd rather start from the opportunities that exist in
Yeah.
Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So we noticed that circular economy in Africa is something we've been practicing all this while. It has existed, it's been part of our practices. So for example, you know that when growing up, your elderly sibling can hand over their clothing when it's in good shape. So
Yeah.
that's like reusing so that you're avoiding waste. That means they're going to buy less for you. These are some things we used to do. So Footprints wanted to bring out these practices in Africa so that we know that the name circular economy or the tag is new, but the practice has always been with Africa. And so we wanted to showcase these practices and help people know that this is what you've always been doing. So you just have to go back to what you've been doing, like we would say, Sankofa. You just have to go back to what you've been doing. When we used to eat from the leaves, and when you throw the leaves out, then they decompose so that we are creating less waste. So we wanted to project this. We wanted to to give that global exposure to these practices and show the world that this is what we've been doing. You can also learn from them. That is just one aspect. But then we wanted to typically show people in Africa that you have been doing this and it's possible and you can learn from others on the continent and these things are possible. That is the opportunity we wanted to put out there.
It's worth bringing in some of the key things that we noticed when we were doing a recent write-up to showcase circular economy entrepreneurs from across the African continent, of which there are so many. We noticed just from the first 70 we looked at, we noticed some really interesting trends. And I think it really helps to illustrate your points by sharing some of those trends.
So for the trends, we saw a focus on waste. And lots of the initiatives were using waste as a resource, all right, instead of rethinking the business model. So out of the 23 cases that we interviewed, we saw that 16 of them were using waste as a resource. And we also saw that there was this multiple examples and there were parallel evolution. So we saw black soldier fly being used for compost and being used for animal feed. And we saw that being replicated in other places. So we have neat eco feeds in Ghana. Yeah. And we also have eco juju. So we saw these parallel evolutions and we saw equipment improvisation. For example, I'll talk about pyramid recycling in Ghana. And what they were doing was they're producing plastic wood. They call it plastic wood among other things they produce. But then to produce that wood, they didn't have the resources. And so they had to adapt the crusher to be able to perform the function they needed it to perform. So that was something we also noticed. We also noticed that was the entrepreneurs had this experience. Yeah. So because of the experience they already had, because of the things they've seen, it was easier to transfer this into their production, into their enterprise or their company from what they've seen. Like Joanna mentioned that the colleague in the tea production. So they've been on the ground and they've seen what is happening and that translated into whatever company or enterprise that they built.
So I actually wanted to buttress the point that you made about circular economy actually being just a new tag, but it's actually been in existence on the continent. And I actually listened to a podcast you guys recorded recently. And Derby, you made mention about some of the things some of the individual practices that were already going on the continent, that people are actually trying to reject those practices and rather adapting the new things that actually produce a lot of waste and do not incorporate these circular economy concept. So I think that, education is one of the most important things that we could actually do to enhance these practices. and to even teach the new generation to keep practicing these things. But in your thoughts, apart from education, what do you think are some of the things that we can do to help maintain some of these, let's say, traditions or customs that actually promote circular economy in the countries and on the continent as well?
I would re-emphasize education and then say collaboration. We have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of information, but people don't have access to that information.
Yeah.
And people don't understand why we need to practice circular economy.
Mhm.
Some people feel that this is just another white thing that is being forced down our throats,
Yeah.
but that is not it. And so there is that need to educate people. But apart from that, we need to collaborate because we are talking about a circular economy, and something circular doesn't have a break. And so one person cannot achieve a circular economy. It has to be a joint effort. And one person cannot stand alone and say, I'm circular, or one business cannot stand and say, I'm circular, irrespective of whatever they are doing. So we need to collaborate and see where someone's output can be another person's input and build that circular model. That's why circular economy is not a movement for just one country or one community. It's something that needs connection throughout, global connection to help us achieve this aim, because the continent or the globe is one. The globe is one, and it's just one circular thing, and we all find ourselves in. So we need to join hands.
Maybe I'm trying to be slightly controversial, but I don't necessarily think it's education, because let me give you an example. We probably all know that we need to go to the gym or to do exercise to be healthy, but it doesn't mean that we do it. Do you know what I mean? I hate going to the gym. I'm just not going to go. That's a separate point. But it's because I don't enjoy it and it's not fun. It doesn't make me feel good. And you look at things like Apple and an iPhone. Like, most people can't afford an iPhone. I'm holding an iPhone right now, and it's because of the way they have positioned their product. And so I think one of the things we talked about in podcast that you are referring to, I think, is around housing, for example. So traditional mud housing particularly, which you can see in the north of Ghana, but in other areas, is fantastic. It's great in terms of its properties with regards heat, because it keeps you cool when it's hot and it's warm when it's cold. But people are increasingly moving away because they see it as something for poor people. And Deb shared a very interesting example on this. And so people want a concrete house with a tin roof, which then requires air conditioning to heat, which now is requiring more energy, which is requiring more resources. And that's because of perception. And so I think to change mindsets, I think education is incredibly important, but I don't think it changes our behavior. So I think the way that we position the products and the behaviors that we think we want to champion is really, really critical. And the second thing to say is around market forces. We can't deny market forces and price. So the problem with a lot of sustainable, quote unquote, sustainable products is that they are more expensive, at least potentially with upfront costs, but maybe cheaper lifetime costs. But that's not necessarily relevant when you don't have those upfront costs to spend. So I think we have to think about pricing models as well, and different financial products. And some of that is starting to happen, but we still have a very, very traditional financial sector. So I would say those two things are pretty key.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for adding your voice on that. I think all those factors actually play a very important role in trying to maintain and encourage our local people to still adapt to some of these customs and actually get into circular economy activities and projects. But I would like to talk a little bit about Footprint Africa and some of the companies, projects, and operations that it's carrying out right now. One of the things that I heard on the webinar that actually got me in touch with Deborah was that in the webinar, Deborah made mention of you guys presenting circular economy activities or projects or initiatives within the continent to educate the same people that other people are actually doing these kind of projects, and you can also do it, or you can also practice this. Can you briefly introduce us to the circular economy case studies that you guys initiated about a year ago?
The mission of Footprints is to prove that business can be a force for good. And that's something that we feel very passionately about, that the way that a business's operations are set up in terms of how it treats all of its stakeholders, who are people generally, and the environment around it, is absolutely critical. And businesses The sustainability ethos is one of doing less bad, and we would love to move to a position of doing actual good. So creating meaningful work, which means paying a living wage. That means that people can, because currently people can be employed and still be below the poverty line. So creating meaningful work that creates opportunities and professional development for people particularly marginalized and low-income communities, as well as considering the environmental impact and the way that community resources are being shared, because businesses are part of communities. So the way we do that is we run a program in Ghana for companies in the catering and waste sectors to help them to improve their social and environmental performance. And we do that through the B Corp framework, which is an amazing global framework, which we can talk more about if you're interested later. And then exactly as you said, what is critical to us is this is not a sort of tedious classroom-based program sharing concepts of sustainability. It has to be real and it has to make sense to the businesses that we're working with. And in order for it to make sense, they need to see real life examples. And so working through case studies is something from the very beginning we were very passionate about, not least to show what can be done in the context in which the companies we're working with exist. Because a lot of sustainability examples are shown from Europe and North America, and they're great, but they don't represent the kinds of companies that we're working with. And those companies don't feel that they can relate to those organizations. And so we know that there's incredible things happening across the continent. And what we wanted to do was create a bigger profile for those amazing things, but also to make sure that others who might be interested in replicating what they're doing have access to the incredible work they're doing. So I'll pass on to Debs to share a bit more about the ethos of our circular economy project. Suffice to say, we're running a program in Ghana. And then on the other side, we're doing research to collect case studies.
Thanks, Jo. So about the case study project, we want to build a database of circular economy initiatives in Africa, like you said earlier. So we've been trying to search these initiatives. The aim is to have about 500 cases by end of this year.
Amazing.
So that we are showing people what's happening on the continent, what's possible, and what they can learn from it.
And the second part, building on from that, is touching a little bit on what I said before, this idea of sustainability as a doing less bad. And circular economy, I think, is gaining traction as a concept. People are starting to be excited by it. But the reality is we don't have any data. So we can't tell you what difference does it make. And we are at risk of circular economy being hijacked by people with a kind of marketing sustainability agenda where they want to greenwash. They're like, oh, look at my recycling program. I'm doing a circular economy. And we all know that recycling is not circular economy. Recycling is the last possible option if there's nothing else you can do with your products. And so what is important to us is that we avoid the greenwashing, and we also help companies who really genuinely are acting in circular ways to be recognized as such. And so what we, as a second part from collecting the case study database, is to then say, okay, so how circular are these companies and what's the impact? And so to help companies be able to start to potentially measure their level of circularity and to communicate what the impact of that is. And so we're starting an ambitious project there to try to do that in collaboration with the companies that we've been working with, to find something that is sufficiently rigorous to be able to show evidence, but also is light enough touch that the companies can actually manage it within their operations without taking on some crazy academic exercise. And then from there, because we're starting to understand, as we're speaking to these companies, probably like you are with the people on your podcast, you're starting to see trends, we're starting to see ways in which these companies have shared problems, or maybe there are ways that we can help them. And so from there, we're going to start building training materials and programs for them to help them to improve their level of circularity. So that's where that project is going.
Personally, I think that the circular economy case studies is a very good idea, and it's going to help and make a lot of improvement on the continent. And I would just like to say congratulations on this initiative. It's something that we really, really need. After I joined your webinar, which I keep referring to, I actually went on your website and downloaded the case study that was, I think, published. I saw all this information at one stop talking about circular economy within the continent, and I was super excited about it. Just went on the website of these individual companies, looking at them, checking out what they're doing and how it's inspiring, what are people's response to these case studies and awareness. And I think personally, I'm a witness to this, that it has actually opened my eyes to see that there are actually other small businesses that are actually going on. Some are huge, some are big, that are coming up, trying to think about the environment, trying to think about their community, how to help the people, creating businesses, and also trying to help contribute to sustainability and circular economy on the continent. And I think that this initiative is super good. I don't know if Debbie would like to add something little to how people's response have been.
Thank you. Just like yourself, we've had good responses from the reports, and we've had people come to us and say they loved how it was simple and how it had a lot of information and the examples that were cited in the report. And I think that was one thing that we realized was lacking, these examples that to show people that circular economy is this in definition, but it also means this is what it means in practicality. So people were excited to see that aspect. I think for the organizations, some of them were able to launch some kind of collaboration or get that exposure they needed for the work they were doing. And that was exciting to know that people got invitations or they got these collaborations because they were mentioned in the report. So it was generally had a good response from the reports.
And to all the listeners, I think that if you haven't read this report yet, we're going to put links of case studies. You can download them, check them out, and collaborate with people. It's a platform to just learn more about what other people are doing, initiatives that you can also start. So get in touch with them. Details are going to be in the show notes. I actually want to ask, the goal is to publish about 500 cases by the end of this year. But I'm sure that the public can help. There are stakeholders who can also help in to achieve this goal. But before we get there, can you tell us about some of the challenges that you're facing, and definitely for sure how people, stakeholders can help to make this a little bit of a challenge for you?
I think one of the barrier has been language. It's not so much obvious, but it has been language because we are in Ghana and we have that presence here in Ghana. We have the English language is what we use. But you could go look for a company and just seeing the video, and the video is in French or is it Portuguese? So, or their website, if you're able to translate it, then it goes well for you. If not, then you're just going to be seeing stars, or you call on another colleague who is able to speak that language to support you. That's one of the challenges. Another barrier is the fact that we are working from online and we are not on the ground. So whatever you are seeing is whatever you're seeing from online. And most of these cases or most of these initiatives are practical and they are localized. And most of them do not have internet presence. And we believe that on-ground presence would help to even get more information and more understanding about what the company is doing. Because most of these companies don't even term themselves secular, or they don't have the tag secular. Like Joanna said earlier, we have a lot of those greenwashing who are tagging themselves secular, but those actually doing awesome initiatives are not actually online. And so that is one bit of a challenge. We try to work around it. We try to make sure we are getting enough information. We try to contact some of these entrepreneurs. If we get their phone contacts or emails, we try to get in touch with them. But doing this research from the back of a PC has its own challenges.
I think linked to that, if you get a warm introduction from someone else, it's much easier to have a conversation with someone. I mean, we've had people who have been trying to get in touch with Debs, you can hear because she spends a lot of time trying to get in touch with these entrepreneurs so that we can interview them to pull together the information. And we've spent a lot of time trying to reach someone, and then suddenly someone who they know gives us an introduction, and immediately we get an opportunity to speak with them, which is fantastic. And I think part of that initially was because we didn't have anything to show for our project. Mm-hmm. Now we have the report. People can say, okay, I see what you're trying to do. Because before we were just saying, we're going to do this thing. And, they didn't know what that might look like and whether that would be good for them and a good use of their time. Now they can see it and they feel excited by it. But still, it's hard to get those introductions, and it's hard to get to the right person to have the conversation and to coordinate those conversations. So I think that's been a really tricky point. And because we do have networks in South Africa, in East Africa and Ghana, we've got a really strong group of examples there. But in places like North Africa, we really have no networks there, and particularly in kind of Arabic speaking countries, we really have no networks there. And so we're relying on desk-based research, which, as Deborah said, has its limitations. So that's been a little bit challenging, which is frustrating because we really feel like this project is for those people who are harder to reach, because we want to give them more profile.
Okay, so if you are listening, you're actually getting to know some of the areas where you can collaborate with Footprint Africa, because some of these challenges that you're talking about is definitely something that that you can definitely help them in. So why don't you give them a call, send them an email? We're going to put all those information in the show notes, and you can help to make this project a success. Remember, the target is 500 cases at the end of this year. Be part of it. And then, we're going to celebrate with you. Yeah.
The second project I talked about in terms of getting a little bit of research rigor around the level of circularity and impact, we're still on the lookout for great research partners from across the continent to support us with that work. So if anyone is doing research in this area and would like to collaborate, we're really open. We're always open to collaboration, but particularly in that area.
Okay, maybe it would be a good time to just put how to get in touch with you.
To get in touch, yes, we have our LinkedIn handle, we're on Instagram, and we are on Twitter, but then our email is changemakers@Footprint.Africa. You can send in any request or any question or any collaboration message to that email, and would receive it and respond accordingly. I think we'll share the LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter handles with you, David, so you can add them to the notes.
And Debs, just to clarify, that's changemakers@footprintsafrica.co, C-O, not .com.
Okay, perfect. Sounds really good. Before we wrap up, I would just like to ask, earlier, Joanna, you made mention about the B Corp initiative. And I remember that we had a preparation chat earlier. You made mention of this, but I actually didn't get the idea really well until I went to your YouTube channel to look at some of the stories that have been published there. And I was marveled, because I look at some of the initiatives that people had already started, already existing businesses. And I mean, some of them knew that we're already making it. And you came in with this initiative, and some of the things that you put in line has helped them to improve their project and their processes in their company. Would you like to share a little bit about what this initiative is about and what are some of the success stories?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because B Corp is a global certification. It was started in the US and it's really gaining traction in the UK. So we actually hesitated quite a lot before we introduced it in Ghana, because we didn't want to be seen to be using something from the outside. And we really wanted to make sure it fitted the needs of the companies that we were working with. But effectively, B Corp is a certification for businesses who are trying to be a force for good. And it effectively has 5 pillars, which include governance, workers, community, customers, and environment. And so it has, across these 5 pillars, it has a series of questions. So the B impact assessment is a self-assessment that companies can take themselves through with a series of questions across each of those 5 pillars to see in practice how they are interpreting, I guess, sustainability in their operations. And it's very practical. It looks for everything from their financial management, their board, their employees, and all of the policies and practices they have around them. And we absolutely love it because it's so practical and it's so pragmatic. It's not a kind of wishy-washy thing. It's really about your business and how you're managing your business. And it breaks down For example, like how you pay your employees, whether you give your employees time off to do volunteering, how many hours of professional development each employee gets, how many hours of personal development each employee gets. So you can really see, you say, oh yes, I really invest in my workers, but like, tell us in practice, what does that look like? And it's been a really great guide for us in terms of how we're managing our own operations. And we found it to be incredibly helpful for companies that we're working with. So there's lots of amazing examples. And Debs, I'll ask you to maybe come in as well and share one that you feel particularly inspired by.
I will still go to pyramid recycling. Yeah, I find them exciting and inspiring because of where their company moved to where they are now. They were a company that was pretty much informal. You could call them informal. So they were one of those pioneering companies in plastic recycling in Ghana. And I don't know if you know of this line we use for the curtains, the curtain rope. They are the ones who produce that and distribute all over, as far as I know, here in Ghana. They actually send it out of Ghana too. They are this pioneering company, plastic recycling, and they came into this program and they were about their business, right? They had these ideas, great, awesome ideas, but they were not actually the company that you could sit down to say, you have to go through process A, process B, and to get your stuff done. But they had a very great delivery partner who supported them and made them present at all times and made sure that they were getting the maximum benefit from the program. In the end, I think right now their plastic wood has been certified and they are yet to produce at scale. I also think when they joined us, they were not having this internet presence. But now they have their Facebook handle open, and with support from the delivery partner, which the B Corp program offers. They also have been able to organize their governance structure and how they relate with their employees to get maximum benefits and mutual benefits from both sides. I really find them inspiring. And what excites me about this company the most is the fact that they have women who are trained to handle the machines. And it's not the normal, especially here in Ghana. You have the women doing the picking or doing something else and the men on the machines. But Pyramid has the women on the machines, and it's interesting to know that. So I would go with Pyramid Recycling.
The founder is also an incredible human being. He is so inspiring. He has inspired all of us, I think, with his humility and how he has just seized everything that we've thrown at him, basically. So he's the exact kind of entrepreneur we want to work with because he's just grabbed everything and applied it, and you can see the difference. So it's incredibly inspiring to be able to work with entrepreneurs like that and to be able to support them. And really, like, he's done all the work. It's I feel like our program's just created space for him to do what he's capable of doing anyway. I wanted to mention Jacora Ventures, who they were part of our first cohort of companies in the B Corp program. They just seized everything with huge amounts of zeal, and they have an incredibly dedicated and passionate team. They got through our program, and then our program sort of acts as a selection process. And at the end, companies are eligible to apply for grants. And Jacora was awarded a grant in order to begin segregation. Well, they already had started piloting segregation activities, waste segregation, to provide community level recycling, which house to house recycling, which doesn't exist in Ghana, or didn't until now. And so we were able to provide them funding so they could expand that program to 800 households in an area in Accra. And that's been incredibly successful. And we're just so proud to have been able to support them and to support them on their journey to do the work they're doing, because now they've created a model which hopefully can be scaled. So we're really inspired by them as an organization.
Yeah, for sure. I'm also super, super inspired about these stories. And I actually got more inspired as I watched these videos on your YouTube channel. But aside the circular economy projects, which you already have talked about some of the targets for this year, what should we expect from both of these projects?
Good question. So we've already mentioned, obviously, we'll be at 500 case studies by the end of the year. which Deborah's working hard on. And I think actually, to be fair, I'm not sure Deborah can share an update if she has the numbers to hand, but I think we're on track for now. It's a really ambitious
Sounds
target.
good.
So getting to those 500 case studies. By October, we hope to publish our next circular economy report, which will be a deep dive into regenerative agriculture. And so we'll be showcasing examples from across the continent of companies working in the space of regenerative agriculture, which is a topic I could talk to you for hours about. It's so important.
Yeah.
So that obviously we've mentioned the measurement framework that we're going to be working on, and then training tools for circular economy companies and practitioners. We've been collaborating with the African Circular Economy Network on this project, on this case study project. And so there's more to come there, as well as Circle Economy, which is a Dutch-based think tank who have relaunched their knowledge hub this year. And we've placed a collection of African stories and case studies onto their knowledge hub to create more of a global presence for those organizations. So there's some really interesting collaborations and some interesting conversations going on behind the scenes on all of those projects, which is exciting. For the B Corp project, for the B Corp program, we're currently in cohort 4. So this year we'll have a 5th cohort of, at the moment, it's companies in Ghana. So we're carrying on there to support directly companies working on the ground. And we've also been working with local sort of business coaches and local consultants to encourage them to be using B Corp principles in the work they're doing as they're supporting companies to develop, so that really we're seeing these social and environmental practices becoming mainstream. So that's something that we're really, really passionate about. I think those are some of the main things I can think of. Deborah, what have I missed?
Say the Happy Porch project. I'm really excited about it. It's a web-based app. It takes users through a virtual journey of these circular economy stories that we are going to be putting together. So you don't have everything like in the PDF format, just like that, looking at you, but it takes you through a journey. When you get on the app, it takes you through what case study you want to see, which country you want to see it in, what they are doing, what their story is, and it takes you through that journey to the end. So we are working on something like that to make it interesting to read these stories and give that variety an option.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been thinking and reflecting on a lot is no one really wants to read research. I mean, there are a few people who love reading
Only
research,
the researchers.
Yeah, and I don't even know that they want to read it. I think there's some amazing research out there, so not to do it a disservice, but the reality is the way we engage with material is changing. And so we've been exploring a little bit. You've seen the videos that we've been putting on to showcase the companies that we've been working on. And then also this idea, and we're still grappling with what it's going to look like in practice, but we've had this amazing opportunity to work with an organization called Happy Porch. And it's going to be a sort of as far as a sort of interactive version of our report. And so how can we encourage people to engage more deeply with the material? So we're just exploring some different ways of doing that.
Perfect. It sounds really, really amazing. And I just want to say that congratulations on all these initiatives and some of the things that you are planning to do in the near future. And I think that whilst people are listening to some of these, upcoming activities, they are already identifying areas where they can collaborate. And for sure, details again are going to be in the show notes. So you just contact them and you can get in touch with them to collaborate. And also, I think they should be open to investment as well to support some of the things that they're doing as well. I would just want to ask quickly that, Deborah, what does sustainability mean to you? And what do you think that as an organization and individually you're doing to that effect?
Sustainability to me, inclusiveness, I would say regenerative, and I would say less or no waste. And I believe we are working towards this as an organization. I would go back to the case study, of course, and profiling these businesses. A lot of them are small, medium enterprises. So that is bringing them onto the global table, I believe, and include everyone in this. Can I call it a struggle? So, into the journey to transition to a circular economy. So including everyone, informal and formal, low income earners, high income earners. So inclusiveness is key. And as being regenerative and using less, producing less or no waste at all.
Thank you. Joanna, let me engage you just for a minute. And you have been doing and initiating most of, all these projects that are going on. For sure, there are some things that you definitely don't like and you would like to change. But if you have the chance to change just one thing about human behavior towards the environment, what would it be?
It's interesting because even wording the question as human behavior towards the environment separates humans from the environment, and we're not. We're part of it. So I think the important thing is to see ourselves as part of the environment. I suspect the one thing I would change would be to create more reverence for nature. I was looking at a Mayan culture recently, and they would kind of ask for forgiveness or ask for permission before they would go hunting and before they would kill an animal, to show reverence for that animal's life. And similarly, there are some cultures where they would do the same for like cutting the bough of a tree. Beforehand, they would ask for permission or ask for forgiveness from sort of a greater power, and sort of revere that tree and the life within that tree. So I think if we took that kind of attitude towards resources and towards natural resources, I think it would quite radically change the way that we interacted with the environment.
Thank you so much. Derby, I would like to ask you a final question. What is your advocacy message to people? We have a lot of people from different age ranges listening to us. What would you want to say to them generally as your advocacy message?
I would say that we can always start from wherever we are. We've already mentioned the circular economy. It doesn't have to be huge for you to feel that this is huge, but you can always start from wherever you are and be willing to collaborate and share whatever experience or knowledge you've got so that others can learn from you.
On that note, ladies, I would like to say thank you so much for joining me today on the Green Living Chat podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation. And I think that after this time, there are going to be a lot of collaborations coming the way, because you've been able to inspire a lot of people, especially the youth from around the continent. And I really want to say that congratulations and thank you so much for everything that you are investing into all these projects. And I hope that we can be able to achieve all the goals by the end of this year. So thank you for coming.
Thanks so much for having us, David. It's really been a pleasure to speak to you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Green Living Chat podcast. This initiative is to educate and create awareness on things that really matter. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and comments as we get interactive on our social media platforms at Echo Ahmed Solutions on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. If you would like to be part of these conversations, contact us via email at glcpodcast@echoahmedsolutions.com or see our contact details in the show notes. See you on the next episode, and remember, live green.